winter of 1237, were the vanguard of the most formidable fighting machine on earth. The Russians had no clear idea of what was emerging out of the east. After Bulgar, the next city to suffer the Mongol wrath was Ryazan. Its walls were battered relentlessly for 5 days before finally falling. Most inhabitants were butchered, and the few survivors were encouraged to escape and spread the news to demoralize the next city. In every church, the prayer went up.
Save us, O Lord, from the wrath of the Tatars.
Certainly, it seemed no earthly agency could prevail. The Mongols pressed their attacks at a number of places at once, so the Russian principalities could not unite against the common enemy. They were carved up and dealt with one by one. From Ryazan, the Mongols moved to Suzdal, then to Moscow. According to the Russian chroniclers, the men of Moscow ran away before the barbarians came in sight. From Moscow, they moved to take Vladimir, then Kozelsk. Town after town, city after city, they moved relentlessly through all of Russia. No eye was left open to weep for the dead. The Mongols' advance was relentless. Finally, they made their approach on Kiev. This great city boasted 30 gold-domed churches. It was the largest Christian stronghold the Mongols had yet encountered. Its capture would send shockwaves throughout Eastern Christendom. A chronicler recorded that as their armies approached,
the ground shook with the noise of the massive herds of camels, bullocks, and horses. Behind the walls, it drowned out speech, and the dust that was kicked up hung in the sky like clouds.
The Mongols planned to take Kiev unharmed, but from the ramparts of the city gate, the defending commanders threw down the bodies of the Mongol envoys. This defiance sealed the city's fate. Within 2 days, the wooden walls had been breached. The Mongols stormed inside and charged up the narrow city streets. One of the few structures that survived was the chapel of Santa Sofia. Yet all the Byzantine treasures were carried away, the tombs of saints and princes desecrated and their bones scattered and burnt. Alongside Rome and Constantinople, Kiev was one of the great Christian centers of the Western world. Its destruction was appalling. Some survivors managed to escape here into the tunnels under the foundations of Santa Sofia. Here they stayed with hidden treasures and the prayers of the clergy until the sacking had stopped. The slaughter was so fierce that 5 years later, a visitor reported the plain was still covered with human remains. The destruction of Kiev left a scar on the Russian people that has yet to heal. In 1239, after more than a year of campaigning, the Mongol armies, tired but victorious, moved to the Ukraine to rest, take stock, and plan their next move. The Mongol advance to the edge of Europe was the furthest west any Oriental people had come since Attila the Hun 1,000 years earlier. The imminent encounter with Christendom would be one between two completely different worlds. The Mongols had an array of weapons that had never been seen in Europe. At the heart of the Mongol army was the archer. Whether mounted or on foot, he wielded a bow of terrifying power. This was the Asian or compound bow, made from yak horn and bamboo. Horn and bamboo were glued together and then bound until they set into a single piece. When the bow was strung, it was stressed against the natural curve, creating massive tension and allowing the archer to send an arrow much further and faster than any European opponent. And the Mongol arrow had also evolved into a sophisticated missile. By varying the flight and weight of the wood, the Mongol archer had a large selection of projectiles to choose from. Arrows that would pierce mail, carry messages, make a whistling noise through the air, or even deliver explosives. The mounted archer would fire at full gallop, getting off more than a dozen shots a minute. In comparison, the latest in European technology was the crossbow. Although powerful, it had only half the range of the Mongol bow and was slow and cumbersome. A typical European army of the time was made up of a motley collection of contingents, led by knights and local nobility, who owed different degrees of allegiance to the king. Unlike the Mongol leaders, the nobles may or may not have had experience of actual warfare. To make up the numbers, groups of peasants were often conscripted at the last minute. But the bulk of the army was still the cavalry. Some of these would have been knights from the various holy orders, the Knights Templar, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights. Bound by religious ritual, celibacy, vows of poverty and devotion to the church, they were warrior monks. Though they spent much time practicing the arts and the rituals of war, they were not experienced at fighting as a part of disciplined units. They preferred individual hand-to-hand combat with their enemy, assuming, of course, they ever got that close. But the most obvious distinction between the two armies was the European development of protective armor. A full suit was very heavy and had a notable effect on the speed and mobility of a knight. Over woolen stockings he wore mail leggings that laced all the way up to the crutch. These alone weighed 20 pounds each. Then there was the mail shirt, another 50 or even 60 pounds. In contrast, the Mongol warrior wore a silk undershirt. This was a defense against arrows. The worst harm an arrow makes is when it's removed from a wound. The barbed head tears away at the flesh. But silk is not punctured by an arrow, but carries into the wound, twisting around the head of the arrow. So, by carefully pulling the shirt out of the wound, the arrow can be removed without tearing the flesh. The knight's mail tunic was ineffective against Mongol arrows. Over a felt tunic, the Mongol wore a leather cuirass. It weighed about 20 pounds. Probably the greatest handicap for Europeans was headgear. The mail coif weighed about 20 pounds. Then, finally, there was the bucket-shaped helm, another 10 pounds. With lance, shield, and broadsword, The European horseman expected his mount to carry more than 300 pounds into battle. It all looked impressive, but it was no